Hindsight is 2020. Foresight is a superpower. Black sky. Today, the speed of space-based intelligence meets the urgency of the moment. Unexpected events around the globe suddenly and dynamically alter relationships with allies and adversaries, force rapid national security decisions, and impact the health and safety of entire populations. When you need to act, not just fast, but first, harness the power of a superpower. Black sky.
Hi, welcome back to the Leading Women series. I'm Debra Werner, Space News correspondent, and I'm delighted to speak today with Brigadier General Kristin Panzenhagen. General Panzenhagen has so many jobs that I'm going to let her describe what they are. And one of them is being the Space Force Program Executive Officer for Assured Access to Space. So General Panzenhagen, what are your priorities in that regard?
Sure. Well, first I'm going to take a little bit step up from that and talk about not just the program executive officer role, but assured access to space as an organization, because the overall assured access to space organization encompasses both the acquisition piece of it, which is the program executive officer role, but then also the more operational piece of it, which would be like the space launch deltas. So for assured access to space as a whole, we really derive our priorities first starting from the Space Force mission. So securing our nation's interests in, from, and to space. So when you look at that mission, our job is the to space part, and then also increasingly more so the in space part, because really we're charged with providing mobility to and through space. And then another important backdrop to understand as we talk about the assured access to space priorities is we're doing all of this during an era of great power competition, which has really given immense focus and sense of urgency within the Department of the Air Force. And that has certainly filtered down to us because we know that space-based capabilities are critical in deterrence efforts. And then if necessary, they'd also be critical in prevailing in a conflict situation. And our job is to get those space-based capabilities on orbit. So with all of that as a backdrop, I've really got four broad priorities for the organization. The first is to provide responsive and reliable launch capabilities. So we procure launch as a service, as a commercially provided service. And we've got a great track record, and I think the nation really trusts us to provide that reliable launch capability. And we really add the reliability into it through our mission assurance activities that we have our government folks doing. But you notice I said responsive and reliable launch. So the responsive is the more new piece of that. In this hour of great competition, there may be times when we need to be able to launch more quickly. So that's one of the things that we're focusing on right now. And most of our satellites aren't going to require that capability, right? Most of the satellites we know years ahead of time when they're going to be completed with their manufacturing and testing and when they'll be ready to launch. But there could be some situations where we need to get a capability on orbit quickly, whether that's to provide a new capability or to replenish an existing capability. So we want to make sure from assured access to space standpoint that we have that capability to be more responsive and to operate on tactically relevant timelines when necessary. So that's the first priority. The second priority is to provide resilient and ready spaceports, because it doesn't really do us any good to have all these fantastic rockets if we don't have anywhere to launch them from. So our spaceport infrastructure upgrades haven't really kept pace with how the launch industry pace has increased. So that's a significant area that we're working on right now. Also, in great power competition, we know we can't treat the spaceports like sanctuaries like we have in the past. So we're making sure we not only have the capacity we need going forward, but also that because they're not sanctuaries, they're designed in a more robust and resilient way. And the administration has prioritized $1.3 billion starting in fiscal year 24 over the FIDUP for both Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and Vandenberg Space Force Base to make a lot of these much needed infrastructure upgrades. The third priority I have is an emerging mission set. So that's our space mobility and logistics. As technology has progressed, we're actually at the point as a nation and as a world where we can start thinking about on-orbit logistics, whether it's, servicing, refueling, repairing, manufacturing, all of those things. So right now, what we're doing as industry is continuing to advance and demonstrate those capabilities. The Space Force is really examining where those capabilities could be useful to our mission sets. So looking at the operational need and also looking at the business case to figure out where this makes sense. So we do have a program office stood up that's working on this, and still very much in the nascent analysis stage, but looking forward to increasing partnerships with industry in that mission set. And then the fourth, but not least important priority that we have is developing our workforce. So everything with ensured access to space is difficult. There is no easy part of this. So we need people with the expertise and the innovation and the determination to make this work. We have a fantastic workforce today, and we are investing a lot in making sure we continue to attract the people with those skills and then develop them when we have them. And for assured access to space, it's not just Guardians. We also have a lot of airmen at the Space Launch Deltas. So we're looking to build that workforce both on the Space Force and Air Force sides and get them excited about the mission too, because this is really a fantastic opportunity to be able to work in assured access to space.
So that's the big picture. What are the primary challenges you face in assured access to space?
Sure. So there's a lot of challenges. This is a very complex business that we're in. So I'll kind of take it from the top, more of a global broad perspective, and then bring it down into our actual operations. So when you say challenge, from a strategic perspective, my mind automatically goes to the pacing challenge, right? Which is something Secretary Kendall has talked about a lot. In this era of great power competition, China is our pacing challenge. This is definitely true for assured access to space as well. It's caused us to re-examine our priorities, our strategies, our processes, policies, partnerships, everything to make sure that we are operating in a way where we will be best poised to support and fill our role in great power competition. And then bringing it down a little bit more from a programmatic perspective, the biggest challenge that we have year after year is operating under a continuing resolution at the beginning of the fiscal year. Not having a budget to start off with slows everything down. So in those different priorities that I told you about, whether it's the procuring the launch services, developing the spaceport, or working on the space mobility and logistics new line of effort, all of those are slowed down when we don't have a budget to start with. And that's both the operations and the procurement side of the house. So that is a significant challenge because we are all trying to sprint and make sure we are ready and doing our part for great power competition. But it's hard to sprint when every year you have to slow down. And then bringing it more into just our specific wheelhouse from an operational perspective. Operational capacity is definitely a challenge for us with the increased commercial launch pace. So calendar year 23 was about 30% higher than 22. 24 will be about 30% higher than 23. Just on the Eastern range, we expect to exceed 100 launches this year, which is a huge milestone. It's never been done before. And we know the launch rate, the commercial launch rate especially, is going to continue to increase for at least the next 5 years. So it's an ops tempo we've never seen. It's putting definitely unprecedented stress on our personnel and our equipment because the resourcing through all of this has been fairly consistent. So while we're seeing the ops tempo skyrocket, the resourcing has been increasing at a much slower rate. So that's driving a lot of innovation on our part to make sure we can still do the job with what we have. It is definitely exciting time. There's never a boring day in assured access to space because we have this fantastic mission set that's just continuing to grow. But it is a challenge when we look at operational capacity. The other challenging part is infrastructure capacity to support these launches. So our facilities, commodities, roads, bridges, ports, none of that was designed for the number of rockets and satellites that we've got coming through Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg right now. Now, I do want to foot stomp. We have more than enough capacity to always make sure we are doing the national security space mission. However, that is only on average from year to year, roughly 5 to 10% of the launches that we're doing. So the vast majority is commercial, but I definitely don't want anybody to get the impression that national security is at risk. It's not. We have got that more than covered. What we're trying to do now is make sure we have the capacity to continue to support that commercial industry with their launch needs. And we've been getting support definitely from this. We got some language in the last NDAA to, again, help us recoup some resources to continue to invest to expand this capacity. So it's something that not only are we focused on with assured access to space, but we definitely are getting a lot of focus and help where they can from the administration and from Congress. So I think those are, when we look at our pure mission set, its capacity is the challenge right now, whether it's infrastructure or our operational resources.
So you've referred to infrastructure a couple of times. How would you characterize the current state of the U.S. launch and range infrastructure?
So infrastructure is a concern. We are meeting the needs. Nobody is losing launches right now because of an infrastructure shortfall. But when you look at our infrastructure, there's a lot of cases where it needs to be replaced or upgraded because it was either degraded over time. I mean, we've been launching out of here for about 70 years now. So some of the infrastructure is aging. So we see degradation from time, degradation from a lot of usage. A lot of the infrastructure was never designed to see multiple launches every week. We also have degradation from corrosion, both at Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg. Anywhere you're on the coast, that's a rough area for your infrastructure. And then we have infrastructure concerns just because we're undersized for the launch rate that we have right now. And in some cases, we're actually undersized for the size of the rockets that are coming through. Not necessarily all of our roads and bridges were designed to be large enough for some of these really massive rockets that we're operating today. But the good news, as I alluded before, is we've gotten a lot of support from the administration and from Congress to address both the capacity and resiliency needs of the spaceport. So we are on a good path going forward. Modernization takes time, though. So we have analyzed and prioritized our needs. So we're getting after some of the quick kills and then some of the highest priorities first. And we are definitely working with a sense of urgency to make sure that we are going to continue to have that infrastructure capacity that's needed.
Great. Yes, I wanted to ask you about the status of the modernization plans for the East and West Coast spaceports.
Okay. So modernization is underway. We, as any base does, right, we're constantly doing modernization, but with the support that we got from the administration and the funding that we got starting in fiscal year 24, we have started significant modernization this year. We have a large airfield project out at Cape Canaveral. We're doing a lot of generator work and work on the electrical lines for power resiliency. We're also upgrading our communications capability. And then on the military construction side of the house, we have several of our military construction projects in the design phase right now. So they'll be ready to start construction in about FY26. And when you look at some of the bigger categories that we have for modernization, so we're upgrading and in some cases relocating some of our launch support facilities. So as we've got a lot more launch providers, both at the Cape and Vandenberg, some of the facilities that we used for support are now too close to launch operations. Maybe before they were near a pad that wasn't being used, but now that it's being used, to make sure we're not impacting those launch support operations and making them shut down every time we're refueling a rocket, we're relocating some of those facilities. So that's a pretty large investment, but it's something that makes sure that we won't have to slow down our ops tempo, that we'll be able to keep working while we're launching. Another big category is utilities. So power, water, wastewater, making sure those are sized for the capacity we need, because they're not necessarily appropriately sized right now. But also, as we're going in and doing that work, making sure that they're resilient. This is definitely beneficial when we look at the great power competition and the fact that we're not residing in sanctuaries anymore. But also, when you think about Cape Canaveral and hurricanes coming through every year, everything we can do to make our utilities and our facilities more resilient as we're having to go in and do the work anyway, just gives us a better chance of not having to shut down if we do have a massive hurricane coming through. Another category of the infrastructure upgrades that we're doing is roads. So making sure that we have roads going everywhere we need to, but in a lot of cases, widening the roads. People probably don't think about this a lot, but we have to move the rockets and the satellites around. So we do that by putting them on trucks and driving them on the roads around Vandenberg and the Cape. And they are very large. So we need to make sure that, one, not only do we have roads that are big enough for these large rockets, but ideally that we can also have another lane of traffic going. So we're not shutting down everybody's movement for, every time we have a space asset moving on the Cape or Vandenberg. And then there's a lot of other infrastructure projects. We've got, HVAC is always an issue that needs attention, and making sure we have resiliency there. And, that's especially important when you think about our comm resources and our computing resources that require that HVAC. So it's not just for personal comfort, but there's a very significant list of projects, but we've done a lot of due diligence. So we've gone through both at Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg and made a very detailed roadmap. So we know, as we get certain amounts of funding each year, exactly what project we're going to put them towards, how long it'll take that project to execute. And we've got a lot of eyes watching these, making sure that we stay on track.
You've also spoken about space payload processing as being a bottleneck. How is that being addressed?
So payload processing facilities are definitely a bottleneck. We're probably going to see the first impacts of that in 2025. So the Space Force utilizes commercial capabilities for payload processing. So, from our standpoint, that's a great strategy. Anytime we can use an existing commercial capability as opposed to creating our own capability, that's typically what we try to do. What's made it more difficult is the increased launch cadence. So since we use commercial payload processing facilities, those are the same facilities that the commercial launch companies use for commercial payloads. So now we're competing. When I say we, the national security space satellites are competing with those commercial companies for that limited payload processing space. Another thing that's made it more difficult is many launches now are what we called multi-manifested. So, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you would have a rocket and you'd have one big satellite on top of that rocket. Now you have a rocket and you have 5, 10, 20 different satellites on top of that. And they may all have different processing requirements, different timelines, different cleanliness standards, different security standards. So now for one launch, you may need a lot more different processing bays than you have in the past. So that's really what's driving this bottleneck. Now, what we've done to address it is we are seeking partnerships with industry. We solicited proposals to expand not only the commercial payload processing capacity, but we're also looking for proposals on improving the process and seeing where we can streamline it and maybe cut some days off of what's needed for each processing activity so we can get more throughput. So we did put a solicitation out there. We actually should be getting proposals in today by the end of the day. This covers both the Eastern Range and the Western Range. So we're looking forward to reviewing those proposals, developing more public-private partnerships so we secure the space that we need on the government side, but also that space can be utilized to the commercial benefit. And then both at Space Launch Delta 30 and Space Launch Delta 45 at Vandenberg and Cape Canaveral, we've offered up land lease opportunities to help make it easier for commercial capabilities to come onto the bases and develop payload processing capabilities there. So at this point, we are in the early stages. Like I said, we should be getting some proposals in today. But looking forward to evaluating those proposals. I think there's a lot of excitement on the commercial side as well for developing more of these partnerships because everybody needs this added capacity. So more to come on this one, but we've definitely taken the initial steps to expand that capability.
Great. Over the years, I've heard a lot about the unique IT infrastructure challenges at Vandenberg and at Cape Canaveral. What are those challenges?
So it's interesting that you use the term unique. So last year, towards the end of the year, we invited a group of IT experts in to come in and do what we call walk the range. So they, through the IT lens, looked at the range IT infrastructure, both at the Cape and they've done Vandenberg as well. And what they expressed is that while we do have IT challenges, they're not actually unique. They're not different than what any large, busy company would see. So if you have a large, well-established company, they're going to have a pretty extensive and complex IT infrastructure. It probably will have been added to over time, so it's not all going to age out at the same time. And they have the same challenge that we have as far as our operations have to keep going. We can't shut down for 6, 12 months, completely update the IT infrastructure, and then open back up. So that was actually encouraging for me to hear that our challenge is not unique. A lot of large commercial companies have seen this in many sectors across industry. So there are ways to tackle this that are proven to be successful. So really their best advice was just keep taking one bite of the apple at a time, right? You don't need to shut everything down. Just keep doing what you're doing as funding becomes available, hit those high priorities. And we actually were just corresponding with some of those IT experts this morning, and they continue to recommend doing what they call the quick hits. So the high impact things that you can get done immediately. So that's the strategy that we're taking in updating our IT infrastructure.
That is good to know, that it's similar to what other people see. You've talked about the pace of commercial space launch increasing. Does that create unique opportunities and challenges for you?
It does, absolutely. It creates opportunities and challenges. So the Space Force just published the commercial space strategy last month, but in the launch world, this is nothing new for us. So we have been procuring launch as a service and having very close commercial partnerships for decades. So for us, we have a lot of history to build on. Now, when we look at the pace of commercial launch, there's definitely challenges. Like I mentioned before, there's the strain it puts on our personnel resources, on our equipment, on our infrastructure, where none of those things were sized or scoped to meet the manifest requirements that we have today. There are ways we can address that. We're looking at where we can refine our processes. We're looking at ways where we can take smartly more risk to free up the need for some resources. We're updating our infrastructure. All of this is a substantial effort, but it'll really transform how we do business, and we've got the right team in place to make those decisions. So while the commercial launch pace does put a lot of stress on our resources and our infrastructure, we're working ways to help alleviate that. But when we talk about opportunities for commercial, the benefits to the government from the commercial pace of launch are huge. And it's an incredible opportunity for us. First, we've seen a lot of innovation in the commercial industry, and not just from one company. There's a lot of launch companies out there, some well-established, some still emerging, but we're benefiting from all of that innovation that they're investing in. Also, the scale of launch is beneficial for us when we think about cost savings, right? The more repeatable their processes are, the smoother manufacturing they've got, all of that results in, economies of scale and cost savings for us when we're procuring launches. And then that high pace of launch also gives us unique resiliency opportunities. If we need to launch rapidly, there's a pretty good chance we're not going to have to wait 12, 18 months for a rocket to be produced, because we've got commercial rockets coming through the Cape and coming through Vandenberg constantly. So there are tremendous benefits from the pace of launch. So while we are challenged to make sure we can continue to support that pace from a spaceport perspective, from a procuring launches perspective, it is a fantastic opportunity.
Great. My last question was about the Space Force University Partnership Program, which I had not heard of before. But you are in charge of Purdue University, or how does that work?
Sure. So I am a co-champion with Major General Chris Povak to Purdue University. The program is fantastic. So it's an initiative that's looking to foster closer relationships between the Space Force as a service and academia. So there are currently 14 universities in the University Partnership Program that have this kind of special relationship with the Space Force. And the program was developed really with three objectives. So first, we're looking to develop a workforce for the Space Force. Second, we're looking to advance the research topics that are important to the Space Force. And then third, we're looking to create development opportunities for personnel that are already in the Space Force. So these 14 universities were chosen based on a few criteria. So one, the strength of their STEM academic and research programs. Two, the strength of their Air Force ROTC detachments, because that's where the cadets that will be commissioned into the Space Force are coming from largely. And three, the focus on their diverse student population. So like I said, each school has 2 or 3 senior level guardians assigned to it. And we do a few things. So we interact with the cadets in the ROTC detachment, certainly provide them mentorship, guidance, help get them excited about coming into the Space Force. Purdue provides a little bit of a unique opportunity because it's not just the ROTC cadets, but Purdue is also one of the 3 pilot schools for the Defense Civilian Training Corps. So it's almost like a ROTC program for civilians. So for students that are going to join the military in a civilian capacity when they graduate. So we also get to interact with the DCTC scholars. We interact with the student population at large, even if they have no expressed intent to join the Space Force, for a couple reasons. So one, we just want to make sure they understand that the Space Force is a real thing. It's out there. It's doing fantastic things for our nation and for global security. But also, to spark interest in folks that may be interested in joining the Space Force, or, from my perspective, even if we're sparking interest in space as a career field, if it's not the Space Force, like I said, since commercial partnerships are so important for us, if these students hear about the Space Force, get interested in the mission set and want to contribute by joining industry, that's great too. Another thing that we do as the Space Force champions is we work with faculty on developing opportunities for current guardian development. So for example, Purdue has the Purdue Military Research Institute, where they sponsor degree programs for active duty military. So we're very engaged with that program. They also have online programs, or like Purdue Global offers degrees, and they actually just set up their first military base extension at Vandenberg Space Force Base. And then another thing we do as champions is work with the faculty to make sure they understand what the Space Force's research needs are. Those are largely handled and granted under the University Consortium program, which is different, but we try to be a bridge between the faculty and the University Consortium program. And then we just get a kind of broad brush feeling of what the research is that the Purdue faculty are involved in, to see if any of that, maybe we should pull to the forefront and bring up to certain offices in the Space Force that they may be interested in. Specifically for Purdue, they have fantastic expertise in propulsion, astrodynamics, satellite design, all of that directly applicable to the Space Force. But they do bring in a lot of other interdisciplinary programs. So they may couple all of that with political science knowledge or data science strengths to build interdisciplinary teams that can really tackle some of the tough problems that we got. I should say, in full disclosure, I went to Purdue and I got commissioned from the ROTC detachment there. So I am very excited to be involved in this program. It's really amazing for me to be able to go back to Purdue and see what the students and the cadets are working on. I'm blown away every single visit I have. And, hopefully it's also exciting for them to get to see one of their alumni come through and be a leader in the Space Force. But it's a tremendous program. I think the investment that the Space Force has put into it is going to yield a lot of benefits. And just speaking for Purdue, they are all in on this relationship. They are really trying to strengthen their ties and their contributions to the DoD at large, but also specifically the Space Force.
I'm going to learn more about that program. That's very interesting. You've covered my questions. Was there anything else you wanted to say?
Just a couple things. So, we talked a lot about the challenges that assured access to space has, but, I just want to reassure you that we are innovating, we're investing smartly, we're building partnerships, we're increasing capacity. So we are 100% ready to do our national security space role. We are standing by, ready to support and improving our capabilities every day. And then the second thing I would just like to say, thanks to your readers and your audience, we get tremendous support in the Space Force from the American public. And that is really special for us to see. And we really appreciate the level of interest that the public has in learning about the Space Force and our mission, and really appreciate the support. And, I can say specifically being stationed in Florida in what we call the Space Coast part of Florida, man, we've got fantastic community partnerships. So just thanks to everybody who's part of that.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Absolutely. You too.